Well, good morning. What's going on? This is Pastor Jay here with your morning devotional. I'm coming to you all the way from the rooftop here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's beautiful. It's green. It's in the 80s. I'm loving it. We're going to talk a little bit more about freedom and your independence, why that matters, and your appreciation and what it should make you do. Here we go. Well, what's going on, guys? It's Pastor Jay here. I'm so grateful to be with you this morning. We've been talking about the idea of freedom and why it's so important to understand it fully, the entire concept of freedom, and what Christ did for you when he died and purchased you to be part of his kingdom. So we've gone over all these different things, and last week, at the beginning of last week, we talked about the idea that freedom is something that has to be purchased. It has to be purchased by something. It costs someone something. It requires a sacrifice. And so I started to think about that, and in reflection with this week as we're coming into July 4th, started thinking about America and where it is in its history. And right now, how so many Americans, myself even included many times, I just don't value the independence like I should. I don't value the freedom that was bought for me 200 some years ago when this country was born. See, we're celebrating the birth of our independence. We're celebrating that this weekend. It started to get me to consider that there was much sacrifice made for me to be an American. Similar to the idea that there was a sacrifice made for me and you to be a Christian, right? And the thing is I find myself here in 2020 so often and so many times really finding myself complaining. I don't know about you, but there's things in our country right now that I want to change. There's things that bother me. But instead, what happens, instead of that activating me to actually spur me on, a lot of times I find myself just being part of a talking head, a talking group of people that just find myself complaining about things. I find this so similar to our walk with Christ. You know, when Jesus purchased our freedom, when he set us free from the power of sin and the grave, no longer to be bound by this world, something so interesting happens. But after a while, as Christians, we start to lose the luster of that. We start to lose the luster of the power of the freedom. And I find myself, and maybe you do as a Christian, sometimes looking at some of the things that God calls us to do and me just saying, you know what, I want to go my own way. My flesh starts to talk. Reminded me of a time when my wife and we went to Dominican Republic many years ago. We flew into a main hotel because main hub, main city, and we wanted to drive an hour and a half to get to Punta Cana where the resort was. We were doing it on the cheap, surprise, surprise, right? So anyway, we're doing this, and when we got to the rental car, we were given this map that looked like a Waffle House map. I mean, this is before the time of GPS, so they gave it to us and said, hey, just go east and you'll run into it if you follow this map. So as we were driving in this incredibly poverty-stricken country, my wife and I saw so much that we just couldn't believe. We ended up pulling into this one town and stopped at a stoplight, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came a rush of a few men, young boys, coming and knocking and crushing our windows of our car and really trying to rob us. And I just remember being, with my wife, not even being able to speak all the language and just totally freaked out, totally scared out of my mind. And here's the thing, there was no one to help me. There was no order. There was no law. There was no balance. And it was so interesting how when we got out of that and we just sped off, not even looking back at the people that were coming after us, we sped off, and I just thought, man, I am so grateful for the governing force, the systems in place of my own country. Because without governing, without laws, without jurisdictions and legislation, chaos ensues. Similar for our walk with the Lord. God set up laws for us. And these laws were for us to thrive as believers. His law is perfect. And so when we try to buck that system because it doesn't particularly agree with our emotions or our flesh man in the moment, what I believe is so often we more or less take for granted that independence. We find ourselves rebelling when a law of God, rule of God, interacts with our flesh man. And we don't want to do what we're called to do. I want to read something to you from Colossians chapter 1 that I think is really cool. For this reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding that the Spirit gives. We do this so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work and growing in the knowledge of God. See, what the idea of our independence is that we're actually supposed to be responsible to live a life worthy of that independence that was purchased for us. And I find ourselves so often, even in our own country, as we're celebrating independence this week, I find ourselves being flippant, being frustrated, being indignant by these laws that are supposed to govern us and protect us and make us prosper. See the balance here. Our independence, yes, we have that, but are we appreciating it? Are we actually with God every day saying, Lord, I love your law. I love what you've provided for me to do, and you're calling me to a higher calling. Or are we becoming rebellious? Are we becoming indignant? Are we scoffing at the laws of God? Those laws, the laws that we have, we're to abide in them and grow in our independence. I hope this makes sense to you. And I hope today and this week you reflect upon not only the country's independence and our great nation that we have, but also the freedom that you have in Jesus Christ and the laws that are around it that create order, balance, and ultimately your good. I love you guys. I'll see you tomorrow morning.